Welcome to One on One. I'm Greg Bassey, your host from the Salisbury Independent newspaper, and today we have another city council candidate with us as part of our series of interviews with people running for city council. But this person is running in a different way. She has no one running against her, so she's going to win, I guess. Laura Mitchell, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
What's it like to be on cruise control here?
Well,
but knowing you're not on cruise control.
No. No, it's a little different. It just meant that there was one less line on the map as I'm cruising around. So I keep pretty busy. It is a little easier to not have that election to worry about as far as having an opponent, but still very focused on getting people out to vote.
Right.
Particularly in my district, there were some concerns about going to a 5-district system and whether we'd have candidates in each district and how that would affect turnout. I think it's going to improve it. But then we end up with a district like mine where I'm unopposed and Jake is unopposed as mayor.
Right.
So for my district, those are the only 2 names on the ballot.
Right.
And particularly you get a rainy day or something like that, you're going to get the really committed voter come out. But
Right.
I still want to make sure that everybody else is involved.
Yeah, you want people to turn out because
Sure.
the east side of Salisbury is like the most venerable area of Salisbury to me. So you're in District 5, a brand new District 5. Right. So it's a mix of residential neighborhoods and some multifamily apartment type stuff. It's a complicated district there.
Right, and some of the multifamilies are owned, some
Right.
of them are rented. There are single family homes that are owned, there's some that are rented. It's really a mix. There's some commercial in there, a little less density in some areas,
Right.
other areas quite dense. It covers down Shoemaker.
It's a sprawling
area,
district.
So it is.
Yeah.
A lot of our districts are because of our density. District 4, for instance, goes from the north end of town right down through
Right.
the middle because there are fewer residents and more business in the north end. So in order to get that population number up where you need it, we had to go right down the center and grab that part and build everything else around it.
Right. Now, you're an accountant by trade.
Yes.
And I see this on the city council watching closely, where you're also the vice president of the city council.
Right.
I see you bringing your accounting hat to work on that dais during the meetings.
Yeah, I can't help it.
Yeah.
It just comes out. A lot of things that we do come down to need, and it just has to happen. And government's role is to do, in my opinion, what private industry can't or won't. Barriers to entry or lack of return on investment, something like, those sort of things. But there are some things that even if it doesn't make dollars and cents, we have to do. Those
Right.
are those things that must be done. Healthcare, building hospitals and those kinds of things. There's a mix. So there's all kinds of different ways that things are shaped, and those public-private partnerships are becoming more and more popular.
Right.
But you have to look at each one individually. You can't just say, oh, the bottom line, we're going to lose money, and so we can't do it. You get a lot of argument about government should be run like a business. Well, businesses are there to make a profit.
Right.
And do you really want your government making a profit? No. So it's a different animal. And there are things that we have to do, even though we know that there's no source of revenue to cover the costs. And that's where the taxes come in.
Right.
So, but trying to balance all of those competing interests, it's challenging because you've always got public service like fire and police, your first responders, public safety issues, and then you have the roads and all the other things that everyone just knows they're there.
Right.
We expect them to be there. We
Right.
expect to be able to drive down the road and not hit a pothole that messes up our wheels or our car alignment or anything. But we don't think necessarily about where that funding comes from.
Right.
And when you start weighing those things at budget time, public safety almost always wins out. Because how do you say, no, we're not going to man this fire truck, or we're not going to have these officers on the street, and then have something happen? You hit a pothole and you get have to get on alignment again. Okay, fine.
Right.
You know, life goes on. But in the public safety realm, that's not necessarily true. So it's that always rises to the top, but it can't be the only consideration because the other functions do have to happen. You flush the toilet, you want it to work.
Right.
So.
Well, during your time on council, a little over 4 years, the crime rate's down significantly. You all hired Barbara Duncan, I guess, while you were on the council.
That happened just before I came.
Just before you came,
yes.
okay.
But it was a very good choice.
Right. So, but that seems to be the consensus that she's been a good choice.
Yes.
So the crime issue isn't what it has been, but lately there's a lot of focus on youth crime.
Yeah, and we have done a lot to address our crime, but there's still a lot more to do. Always. There's never going to be enough money
Sure.
to do everything that we need to do or that people want done. It just isn't going to happen. But in terms of the police department, 2 years ago we added additional monies to try to help some compression issues that we had there, where people coming in were making almost as much as the people
Right.
that were supervising them.
Right.
In some cases even a little more. And that was really detrimental to morale. We were having trouble keeping officers, and it costs somewhere around $21,000 to hire, train, and outfit an officer and put them on the street. And
Right.
then you've got field training. So every time we lost somebody to another agency after we spent that $21,000, we had to start over again. And so it became apparent that we had to take steps to try to retain those officers. So we addressed that. And then in this last budget, the one before, we put in another $1 million, I believe it was,
Right.
to add 10 new officers.
10 officers, right.
Which, with some reorganization at the department level, put 15 more on
Right.
the street, because we were able to hire some civilians to do jobs that we had sworn officers doing and put them back out in the community, interacting and answering calls. So that's really a focus as well. Even so, we still have issues with, as you said, increasing juvenile crime. Sometimes you look at things and you wonder, are there more, or are we noticing more? And I think this is a little bit of both. There's been a focus put on it with the curfew discussions.
Right.
But there's also an uptick, and there are reasons for that. One of the upticks that we saw was when Stop the Violence closed over on Callaway Street,
Right.
because of building issues. And these kids that were going there for after-school programs, tutoring, help with their homework,
Right.
playing basketball, hanging out in a safe environment, getting fed, and in many cases, that suddenly was gone. So then they're on the street like, oh, what do we do? What do we do? And somebody has a bright idea to go, let's go do this. Okay.
Right.
And several go along, and then you have issues, petty crime, mischievous kind of things, or nuisance crimes, as they're sometimes called. It depends, I guess, on which side you're on of that, how big a nuisance, whether it's
Sure.
a minor nuisance crime or a
Yeah.
really big, deal to you. If somebody busts out your window and it costs you a half day of work to get it fixed, it's a big deal. It's a little more than a nuisance.
I mean, it's a minor thing. My bicycle was stolen by a kid right in front of my office. It's a $300 bicycle. It doesn't matter in the big scope of the world, but the personal violation and the sort of the sense that you have about the overall community from something like that, it is a detriment. It really is.
It is.
So you can argue it's a silly thing, but at the same time, there's an effect that you can't quite explain. And I know this is happening all over town.
Yeah, and if that goes unchecked, if they're able to get
Right.
away with small things, it tends to grow. They tend to do
Right.
a little more, a little more, a little more, because oftentimes that's a cry for help. So if they don't get the cry with the first, the answer to that cry with the first outreach, then they might escalate a little more.
Right.
And they feel maybe emboldened in some cases, and so it's important to catch them at that level. And intervene and offer the services and get them in programs and doing things, but where are those programs?
Right.
Where is that
Who's
after
going to
school
run them?
place?
Who's going to fund them?
Yeah. And where's the building to go to?
Yeah.
So one of the things that I really want to see happen is the former Linens of the Week property we
Sure.
have. No one wants to build a house on it because of the prior contamination, which has been remediated.
Right.
But they prefer that the soil be capped and not disturbed. So if we put a community center there, if we can leverage the ownership of the land, the value of the land, to get grants and funding to build a community center there and cover whatever's left with basketball courts or tennis courts or other solid
And
surfaces.
that's a great location.
And it is exactly where it needs to be. There's a little piece of the field of the property that's across the street that that street is not terribly traveled, so
Sure.
it could become one. That's a whole nother discussion. But as far as I'm aware, that part didn't have the contamination that the other one did. So that could be a green space. That could be a soccer field or something like that.
Right.
And then there's another little parcel right across from that that's currently used by the residents there as parking. Might be a little bit difficult to
Right.
take that away. Maybe we just make that permanent, or maybe that's a good space for a community garden in
Right.
the area. So there are a lot of possibilities there, but as usual, it comes back to funding and how do you do that. So I've been having a lot of conversations with a lot of different agencies, and how we put that together and what services are offered there depends on, it can dictate what monies are available to us. So.
Right. It's interesting with the curfew discussion, there's been some public forums about that, the idea of making kids come in, kids of a certain age being inside by a certain hour. And that seemed to have been sparked by an assault that happened on Camden Avenue right around Christmas time,
Right.
In broad daylight on a weekend.
Right.
But it turned into like, well, we need a curfew because of the assault. But there have been things going on before that. So I guess it was like sort of the last straw that drove that discussion.
Right. I think that because it was juveniles that did
Right.
it, that's what sparked that conversation. And the request came from the community. They really wanted to look at having a curfew and getting kids off the street at all hours of the night. I think it's more of a problem in the summer
Right.
when it's warm and it's light later, and you know, everybody's kind of more laid back. They don't have to get up and go to school necessarily in the morning or go anywhere in the morning. So I think it's escalated then, but it's a year-round issue as well. And I hear stories of the officers going to an area and there's 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds out on the street
Right.
at midnight or 1 o'clock. And there are older siblings maybe, but there's no parent around. There's
Right.
no, you know, and maybe they're working, maybe the kids are supposed to be in the yard and they wandered off. You know, there are all kinds of speculation and things that we can try to use to explain or understand.
And it's
But the
not
bottom
necessarily
line-
unique to Salisbury that this kind of stuff happens.
No, absolutely not. The bottom line, though, it's not safe for them to be out there. Whether the curfew is the way to address that, or having another option, a place for them to be where they can have that sense of belonging,
Right.
and not end up feeling like the only place they can belong is in a gang or in a group of kids that are not going on the right path. Which one is the right answer? Is it both? We haven't quite figured that out yet. There are issues with the curfew. There are questions about the times. It's pretty complex right now as to how old you are, when you could be out, what time of year. It changes in the summer, in the winter it changes by age group.
Right.
So it's pretty complex. And the officers in the car, I can just see them kind of having a flow chart of, okay, how old are you? And it's
What time is it?
okay, you're not supposed to. You're okay. You got 5 minutes to get home.
You have to go home, but you can stay.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's challenging. They're running call after call after call right now, and so then there's, okay, you pick up a child on a curfew violation. It's not an arrest. It's not a ticket. It's not technically a detention.
Right.
But you can't. If you can take them home, they could say, "I live here," if they'll tell you, and you take them home, and there's a parent there, and you turn them over to them. Fine. But if you can't contact an adult or a guardian, then they've got to take them back to the station and they have to stay there with them.
Right.
So now we have officers off the streets that were already overburdened with calls, and the remaining ones are even more overburdened.
And we have no logical place to hold kids.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And what do they do while they're there? They're not running around with their backpack with their homework in it, so you can't say, sit down and do your homework now.
Right.
So how do we make that connection with the schools to know what it is they're supposed to be doing? Or if they're old enough to have them looking for jobs and, those kinds of things. Baltimore, which this is the draft that was brought to us, was basically Baltimore's ordinance. They have a youth connection center, and they have a place to take them and engage them.
Right.
So that they start to find out from them what their needs are, what's going on in the family. Is it safer on the streets than it is at home, perhaps, in some cases? what's happening, what services do you need, and how can we get them to you. We don't have that, and we've talked with a number of different partners and talked about a lot of different things. But it's who's going to pay for it.
Right.
Where does that funding come from? DHS and DJS, they're all, juvenile services, all on board. Yeah, let's do it.
Right.
But how do we pay for it?
Right.
Because people don't work for free. We can do some with volunteers, but there still has to be coordination. There has to be training. There's a lot, background checks. There's a lot that goes into this.
Right. And it occurs to me too that even though this problem has developed, it's become more of a problem, there's so many great groups that are keeping the problem from being way bigger than it is. So like when I'm over at the Salvation Army and I see what they've got going on over there, we are lucky to have things going on that keep, so it's only a small percentage of kids that are causing this trouble, I guess.
Yeah, it's probably the 80-20 rule.
Right.
Again, it's in most things. There are a few, and they are very visible in many cases, and that is creating a problem. But the solution of a curfew isn't selective. It's citywide and applies to everybody.
Right.
And so then you have to look at, okay, if this goes into effect, we're going to need to make sure we have records to show that our officers have patrolled the entire city.
Right.
And this area or that area or another area is where the violations repeatedly occurred, and not that they made a beeline for a particular
Selective
neighborhood at curfew time.
Yeah.
So because we don't want that to come back and even look like there's selective enforcement or uneven application.
Right.
The kids are where they are, and it may not be their neighborhood, it may be, who knows, but we find them where we find them. But I have a concern about making sure that we don't inflame any concerns that people may already have in the community about disproportionate contact with minorities.
Right.
There's the position with the schools that came from the state. The city declined to take it, and it ended up with the school board. Mark Thompson does.
Right.
And there's we have one of the highest rates of disproportionate contact in the state. I don't want to exacerbate that. So we have to be really careful with that as well. Most of the research that I've done, all the research that I've done, has shown that it for the most part, curfews aren't really particularly effective. They're costly, but not effective. And I'd almost rather see us put an extra person, whether it's auxiliary or a sworn officer or somebody that's in uniform and representing the law enforcement community, in the community playing basketball or football or lacrosse or something with the kids a couple of shifts, rather than having them sitting at this police station where the child feels like they're in trouble, whether they are or they aren't. It feels like the beginning of a problem with the justice system. And
there's a human perception thing too. If you're a citizen and you see kids on the street and it's the middle of the night, you go, well, the cops aren't doing their job. You know, it's like when someone passes you speeding, you say, well, the cops aren't doing their job. When you should say, why is that guy speeding?
Right. Yes.
You know, why are those kids out? But it turns into this negative thing, which is just unfortunate, really. Yeah.
And, you know, I hear a lot of people harken back to a time where if some kid was riding down their bike or walking down the street at 9 o'clock or 12 o'clock at night, somebody was on their porch or outside, or they'd see them walk by and they'd come outside and say, what the heck are you doing? You know, where's your parent? Where do you live?
Or they knew who you were. They call your parent.
Right. You know, is something going on? You know, why are you out here? Let's talk, whatever. People are hesitant to get involved. It's none
of my business. Yeah, I understand that.
And so what we get is every house is its own little silo.
Yeah.
And we've lost that sense of community in a lot of ways. And so one of the things that we're really trying to do is bring back that involvement, bring back that sense of community, and getting people involved and willing to step up and help, and to talk to people and to mentor and do, you know, all of the things that can help before they're in a crisis.
Right.
And prevent that crisis rather than being more proactive rather than reactive.
Right. You're very involved in the Maryland Municipal League.
Yes.
And you've actually taken a leadership role there. Tell me about that.
Yeah, I've been, I was elected in April of 2011, and in June I went to the convention in Ocean City for Maryland Municipal League that they hold every year. There's a lot of educational classes that go on there and seminars that pertain to current issues, and I learned a lot just in the first year. So I volunteered to serve on the legislative committee, and not having any idea what I was doing
Right.
at all. And that was really instrumental for me, because what they do is they look at every piece of legislation that's submitted by our state legislators and evaluate it for a potential local impact.
Right.
If it's going to have an impact, then they bring it to the legislative committee, impact on the municipalities, they'll bring it to the legislative committee, and they make the decision whether to support it, oppose it, or support with amendments. Rarely oppose anything, because that means you don't get a seat at the table.
Right.
You're opposed to it. We don't want to waste our time. So it's usually either support or support with amendments. So
Right.
it may be an overall good bill, but there may be a little piece in there that doesn't quite work. This needs to be tweaked. So that was my first foray into Maryland Municipal League. I served 2 years on the legislative committee, then the communications committee. This year I'm on the convention planning committee. But I was also in that first year at the local level, our Eastern Shore chapter, asked to serve as district vice president for the Lower Shore district. And so I got involved. That involves being on the board.
Right.
That's a board seat. So I got involved at that level as well. And having some decision-making roles with the board about how which direction Maryland Municipal League's going in the strategic plan and in carrying those out and making sure that we're meeting the needs of the 157 municipalities that we serve. So that has been very enlightening as well, in getting to bring concerns from other
Right.
towns and sharing information about, well, I was just talking to somebody from this town who just dealt with that, and here's a copy of their ordinance or what they did, and making the same thing I'm doing on council between various entities and residents, making those connections, hearing the need, and knowing that somebody else has an ability to help with that, and just putting them together.
Right.
And it's very rewarding.
Well, Carl Anderton, the former mayor of Del Mar, who's now the state delegate, who represents part of your district over
Yes.
there in District 5, he sort of earned his chops on MML and talks all the time about how much he learned there and how it really helps him as a delegate now.
Yes, it does. And it's great that we have people with municipal experience in Annapolis,
Yeah.
because it's a different beast.
Yeah.
The feds can pass it down to the states can pass it to the counties can pass it to the municipalities, and we don't have anywhere else to put it except with the citizens. And we're face to face with them in the grocery store every day,
Right.
and on the street and at events. So it's a little bit different at the local level, and we have less control over what our tax revenues are in terms of, I mean, we have the property tax control, but the income tax and the sales tax rates and the gas tax, the money we get back for highway user revenues, we kind of get whatever they give us.
Right.
So, and have to make it work. We don't, but having Maryland Municipal League, they are our advocate in Annapolis. They're already having meetings with secretaries and with the governor's staff, and because they're putting together the budget for the next
Right.
year. And it's a lot easier if it's in the budget
Right.
to keep it in the budget
Right.
than it is to go back and get it in after
Right.
it's introduced.
Right.
So the work is pretty much year round. It doesn't really stop.
Now, as the council vice president, I enjoy when the council president, Jake Day, is out of town and then you have to step in.
I'm glad you enjoy that.
No, because you seem to enjoy it.
I like getting things done.
You don't have the power trip thing going on. It's not like that, but you seem to enjoy the consensus building and the conversation that goes on when in those meetings. I think Jake's maybe a little more clipped. They go through things faster, and you're a little more conversational.
Yeah.
But it's really cool that way, I think.
I think part of that might be for my early period on the council,
Right.
and not necessarily always getting to voice.
Right. They wouldn't let you
my-
talk. Yeah, you can say it. They wouldn't let you talk.
Not getting to voice my opinions all the time, or be cut off and doing
Right.
so. So it's important to me that we get everybody's input, because it's not my decision to make. It's not even ours collectively to make.
Right.
We're the mouthpieces, if you will, the representatives for 33,000 people that live in the city of Salisbury. Unfortunately, they don't always talk to us about what they want or don't want until after it's done, and then they're upset about it or they're very, very happy about it. My thing is, if we bring everybody to the table that we can get that has any stake in an issue and we talk about it, and we leave the room and everybody's just a little bit unhappy, then we got it right.
Right.
Because if anybody's really happy, somebody else is really unhappy, and we didn't quite get that mix that we needed. We did that with the towing ordinance. We've done it with a number of things, and it's important to me.
Towing ordinance. How much time has the city council spent
on
gosh. Towing ordinances in the last 10 years? And, I'm the editor of the paper. I don't even know what the towing ordinance is or how it affects anyone, but they'll talk about it for hours.
It was about 2 years in works when I got there.
Yeah.
Maybe a year and a half. It ended up about 2.5 years total by the time we got something done. And what it took was, I said, let me bring everybody to the table.
Right.
And we got the police involved. We had two police, we had two city council representatives, myself and Ms. Cohen.
And the operators.
And the two representatives from the towing operators.
Right.
We had somebody from a national towing organization come in and tell us some of what we had in there we couldn't do.
Right.
And we had our attorney and our city manager. And we all sat down and we went through it piece by piece. The piece of legislation nobody could agree on. It was like 6 pages, I think.
Right.
And we went through it piece by piece. What are we trying to accomplish here? Does this do it? Is it legal? If either of the second two are no, what do we need to change?
Right.
And we worked it out. Is it perfect? No. There's a long list of towers that the police have to go through when they need a police tow.
Right.
That's a little cumbersome for them. They would prefer that was a little different.
Right.
The towers, we set the maximum prices on and some guidelines for them. They would prefer that was a little higher. So no, it's not perfect, which means probably just about right.
Right.
It doesn't make anybody really, really happy, but it's probably not too far off.
The alarm fines issue was another one that's been talked about forever. The constant tweaking with that.
Yeah, and unfortunately, there's one little thing in there that we missed, and you're going to see that again.
Okay.
But it's very, very minor. It's putting responsibility with neighborhood services for determining those, whether it's a finable false alarm, a true false alarm, or if it was the wind blowing, or something like that. If it was they need to play a role. The housing official needs to play a role in that, and we didn't get that in there the first time. They've discovered in actually working it as it's written that there's too many hands in the pot. It really needs a home, an overseer, and they've determined that needs to be neighborhood services. So that little minor tweak, that's all we're doing.
Right. No, I enjoy watching you and Shani Shields down at the end of the table because there's like a mom's thing that's going on. I hope that's not insulting, but
no, not at all.
There's like
grandmoms even.
There's like there's like a mom's thing. There's a common sense mom's thing going on. And there's a sensitivity that you guys bring to things. And then you'll also give input on something that's going on. And sometimes it's like out of right field, but it's like, that's what my mom would advise, and there's common sense that goes. So I like that dynamic.
Thank you. Yeah. I consider that a compliment. Common sense is not so common.
Right.
As we all see every day. And I try to approach things as I really think about how it would impact me or someone I know and try to play that tape through.
Right.
If this happens, then that happens, then this happens, then what 5 steps down the road you have an issue. So that let's address that, and then we can keep moving. And or if we can't address that, and that's an insurmountable thing, then we really don't even need to spend any more time on it. So,
right.
There's kind of that piece of it, and then there's some of it's intuitive, and it doesn't feel right to me, but I want to get other people's input, like the chickens.
Right.
I was not a fan of the urban chickens, not at all. And we're there to represent them. So if they bring it forward, we are duty bound, in my opinion, to consider it.
On our website, it's one of the most popular stories of the entire year.
You know what else, though? That was one of the starting points of people feeling like they could come to council meetings and get involved and voice their opinion and really get involved in making a change.
She's Laura Mitchell. She's going to be on the council another 4 years. Congratulations for that.
Thank you.
Another of our series of interviews with City Council candidates. Today, Laura Mitchell from District 5. I'm Greg Bassett from the Salisbury Independent newspaper with another edition of 101 right here on PAC 14.
First Shore Federal is proud to support PAC 14 and one-on-one. We'd encourage every business to support PAC 14 and pick a program and support it, and let's make a difference.